Chapter 1341. Pearl froze. Tanner hugged her tightly and lowered his head. He pressed his lips on the top of her head and said in a soft voice, "You've become thinner." Before coming to her, he had imagined many different kinds of reunion scenarios. Would he go crazy and express his longing for her? Or would he try to stop at nothing to trap her by his side again? Countless thoughts flitted across his mind, but he was scared when he saw her. He was afraid of her rejection. He was afraid that she would hate him. Pearl stayed frozen stiff in his arms for a long while. She pressed her lips thin and pulled his arms away. "Tanner," she said without turning her head back, "what are you doing here? There's no way we can return to how things were." His heart skipped a beat, and he froze. "Do you still hate me?" "Not anymore." Pearl turned around to look at him. She forced herself to stay calm and said, "I've already let go of everything between us." Tanner walked up to her and said, "But I can't." She was stunned for a moment, but she swiftly regained herself. "That's impossible, Tanner. For you, I'm a blemish in your relationship. You and Sandy would have had a happy life without that marriage contract, so you hate me." "I've never hated you." Tanner stopped in front of her. He gazed into her eyes and continued. "Hate is nothing but an excuse." He pulled her into his arms and stroked her cheek with his palm. His breathing was becoming heavier as he said, "Pearl, I'm a jackass. By the time I realized how wrong I was, I had lost you. I've been living in guilt for the past 3 years, and there hasn't been a day that goes by without me thinking about you." Pearl turned her head sideways and added, "I have a kid. But you aren't married yet." Tanner's finger stopped on her lips. "You haven't been seeing any men for the past 3 years, and if you got pregnant that year, your kid should be this big already, right?" Pearl's heart skipped a beat, and she pushed him away. "Tanner." Tanner took a step back. He looked at her but did not say anything. Pearl turned around and said, "The kid isn't related to you. Don't come back to me anymore." After leaving that sentence, she ran into the house without turning her head back, leaving Tanner to stand as stiff as a ramrod on the spot. The sky was getting darker, and soon, rain fell. Kamala looked out of the window with the kid in her arms. Tanner was still standing in the courtyard, and he was wet thoroughly due to the rain. She looked at Pearl and said, "Pearl, Tanner is still outside." Although she did not want her daughter to have anything to do with the Hannigan, things would go bad for them if anything were to happen to him in the rain. Pearl was stunned and walked to the window. Tanner was standing in the rain. He refused to go away despite being wet thoroughly. Pearl turned away from looking. She was going to pay him no mind, but she did not know why she just couldn't do it. She grabbed an umbrella and went outside. She placed the umbrella on top of him. Water droplets were dangling on his eyelashes. His face was pale as the rain slid down his head, and his shirt was wet to the skin. Pearl couldn't help herself anymore and shouted, "What the hell are you thinking? I already asked you to leave. Why are you not leaving?" Tanner smiled. "I'm not leaving." Pearl felt something had stung her heart. She leaned the umbrella toward Tanner, allowing the rain to wet her shirt. "Do you think you do this?" Her eyes turned red, "And I'll forgive you?" "Tanner, I won't forgive you. I'll never forgive you." Tanner stretched his arms forward and pulled her into his embrace. "I don't need your forgiveness." He chuckled and added, "I just want to stay by your side." A tear fell from the corner of Pearl's eyes, and she began to sob silently. Suddenly, she felt something fall on her, and Tanner slid down her body. Chapter 1342. Tanner. At Basburga's private middle and high school. Just as Daisy stepped into the classroom with her backpack, Leah and a few other seniors approached her. "Daisy." Leah called her out. She turned her head around and frowned. "What do you want?" Leah had been bullying Lisa, so Daisy did not like them. She did not know how she became the vice president of the student council. Standing with her arms crossed, Leah said, "There is something I want to tell you." Daisy looked at her. What is it? Of course, it's about Lisa. If it's about Lisa, then you can save your breath. Daisy turned around and walked into her classroom. Suddenly, Leah's voice erupted. What if Lisa has been lying to you? Daisy was stumped. She stopped in her tracks and turned her head around to look at Leah. What are you talking about? Lisa has been lying to me? How is that possible? Leah knew Daisy wouldn't believe her. She pulled her phone out and logged into her contact account. Since you don't believe in me, then take a look at this yourself. She handed the phone to Daisy. Look at the true face of your so-called friend. Hesitantly, Daisy took the phone. She lowered her head to look at the screen of the phone. It was a contact account known as Princess Lizzie. All the videos and photos she posted showed an extravagant lifestyle, and no one would be more familiar than Daisy with these photos and videos. All of the clothes, bags, shoes, even watches and bracelets were presents Daisy gave to Lisa. The villa's interior was obviously the Goldman mansion, and she was certain that Lisa must have taken a picture of it when she came to her house last time. The luxury car with its license plate blocked off was also the private car that often brought her and her brother to and from school. Seeing her stunned expression, Leah laughed. Do you believe me now? Your best friend didn't tell you about this social media application, did she? When Daisy did not say anything, Leah went closer to her and continued. Not only that, but she also poses as a rich family's daughter and shows off her wealth on this social media platform with these videos. Thanks to you, she has gathered quite some fans and become a celebrity on this social media platform. Daisy knew that Lisa came from a humble background. She was also aware of Lisa's inferiority complex and willing to share good things with her. She would lend her clothes and bags to her so that she could be as confident as she was. Even though Lisa had not told her about these videos that she posted on the social media platform, Daisy was certain that Lisa was just afraid that she would get angry. When Leah saw that Daisy still did not believe her, she laughed. Daisy, oh, Daisy, are you stupid? Why would Lisa hide it from you if she considered you her friend? Daisy was stumped. That's because you're rich. You're the daughter of Nolan Goldman. You never bother to look at the price tag of an expensive item, and although it isn't a bad thing to be generous to your friends, you have to look at who she is. Leah cut her short. The gap between you and her is as big as the sky and the ground. The vain nature of the poor is something engraved in their bones that can't be changed. It's because they can't have it that they want to show off. A friend who finds vanity appealing. Your generosity just happened to satisfy her hunger for vanity. You should cut ties with her when you still have the chance. By the time she finally reveals her true self and bares her fangs to you, it will be too late. After Leah finished speaking, she left with her group. Chapter 1343. Daisy remained petrified on the spot. She lowered her head and fell into deep thought. Even though she did not believe in everything Leah had said, she found her words difficult to digest. Is Lisa materialistic? She had known Lisa for years, so she knew her inside out. She was the one who willingly gave those things to Lisa, and Lisa had never asked for anything from her. Yes. That's right. Lisa is certainly not materialistic. In the evening, at the Goldman mansion, Daisy had been absent-minded during dinner. Maisie noticed something and asked, "What's wrong, Daisy?" Nolan and Colton looked at her as well. Daisy came around to her senses and shook her head. Lisa will be discharged from the hospital in half a month. Maisie chuckled. Shouldn't you be happy that Lisa is finally discharged from the hospital? You can play with your friend again. Daisy did not say anything and buried her face in her plate. Colton looked at Daisy for a while, but did not say anything. After Daisy finished her meal, she got up and went back to her room upstairs. Nolan looked at the figure of his daughter and frowned. It seems to me that something is troubling Daisy. Maisie was stunned. Is it? Daisy was a teenager, so it was normal for her to encounter some problems. Maisie was just worried that Daisy would blame herself for what happened to Lisa. Daisy had been living under the care of her, Nolan, and her brothers. She was naive and blamed herself for what had happened to Lisa. After all, if she had not changed her clothes with Lisa, things like that wouldn't have happened. She could also see that Daisy was trying her best to make up to Lisa. Maisie suddenly remembered the crazy stuff that Maxine had said. Honestly, she couldn't tell what would happen in the future, but she was worried that this incident would cause a rift in the friendship between Daisy and Lisa. After all, Lisa was innocent. They had mistaken her for Daisy because she was wearing her clothes. Maxine and her crew had brutally tortured her, causing her indelible psychological trauma. Colton put his fork down and stood up. "Dad, Mom, I'm going to take a look at Daisy." Maisie nodded. Colton went upstairs and entered Daisy's room. He saw that Daisy was sitting on the bed with her legs in her arms, and she looked down. He walked over to her and sat on the chair. "Did Leah and the others talk to you today?" Daisy was the only junior high student in the student council and was the disciplinary member of the entire intermediate year group, so he did know Leah. She was a classmate with Saphir in her senior year. "Colton." Daisy lifted her head slowly. "She told me something about Lisa, but I don't believe her." Colton crossed his arms in front of his chest. "Since you don't believe her, why are you still upset about it?" "But what she said seems to be right. Lisa did hide something from me." "Colton, shouldn't there be no secrets between good friends?" Daisy said in confusion. She had never hidden anything from Lisa, and she would tell her everything. Colton frowned. "It isn't necessary. There are secrets between friends too." Daisy pressed her lips and nodded. "Yeah, you're right. I must be overthinking. Lisa is keeping a secret from me, but it doesn't mean that she doesn't think I'm her friend." Colton did not say anything. He knew it was because of the incident, but it seemed to him that he had to look into the thing that Lisa had been hiding from Daisy. The next day, Colton went to the senior students' building to look for Leah after arriving at school. Leah was studying in her class, and the female student beside her nudged her when she noticed Colton. Chapter 1344. Colton was the most popular student in the school aside from Saphir. Although he was just a junior high school student, he was as smart as a senior high school student. Leah turned her head around to look at Colton. She put the textbook down and walked up to him. "Are you here to look for me?" Standing with his hands in his pockets, Colton asked, "What is the thing about Lisa that you told my sister yesterday?" Leah was stunned. After a short while, she chuckled. "Lisa? Did Daisy not tell you about it?" Colton frowned. Leah handed her phone to him and said, "Why don't you look at it yourself?" Colton took her phone and took a look at it for a moment. There was no expression on his face, and Leah patted his shoulder. She went closer to him and said, "Colton, I hope you don't mind me saying this. You should talk to your sister. Don't be the farmer and the viper." At the hospital, in the ward, Lisa was trying to get down from her bed without using crutches. She could stand still right now, but she still felt some pain in her legs whenever she tried to walk. At that moment, Daisy arrived at the ward. When she saw that Lisa was walking, she hurriedly walked over to support her. "Why did you get down from your bed, Lisa?" "I want to see if I can walk or not." "I don't want to keep staying on the bed," Lisa said. Daisy helped her sit on the side of the bed and said, "But you can't rush it. You need to do it step by step." Lisa sat on the side of the bed and looked at Daisy. "Daisy, will you blame me?" Daisy was stunned. She asked dumbfoundedly, "Why should I blame you? When they asked me to call you out to pick me up, there was nothing I could do but follow their orders. I nearly betrayed you." "Don't you hate me?" Lisa asked. After hearing what she said, Daisy chuckled helplessly. "Of course, I am not blaming you. I know you were forced to do it." Lisa finally felt relieved after what Daisy said. She kept her head low and continued. "It's good to know that you don't blame me." "Oh yeah, Leah came to me yesterday. Seeing the change in Lisa's expression, Daisy smiled. Don't worry, she told me that you have been lying to me, but I don't believe her. Even if you're hiding something from me, I can understand as well. Therefore, I'm not going to ask. Daisy said this to comfort Lisa. Lisa fell silent for a long while before parting her lips. Daisy, it's true that I'm hiding something from you, but you should know that my family is poor. Everyone else looks down on me in the school other than you. Daisy nodded. I know, so I won't get upset with you. Lisa forced a smile on her face. Thank you. When Tanner opened his eyes, the first thing that welcomed his vision was Pearl. She was resting on the side of his bed with her eyes closed. Pressing his lips thin, he propped himself up and approached Pearl slowly. He lifted his hand and stroked her cheek. Pearl's eyelashes trembled, and she caught his hand subconsciously. When she met his gaze, she was so startled that she jumped up. You are awake. Tanner leaned against the bed, and his eyes showed a smile. Yeah. Since you're awake, you should probably go back now. Just when Pearl was about to leave, a little boy emerged from the door. He poked his head out and called Pearl out. Mommy. When Tanner saw the kid, he was stunned at first, and then he fixed his gaze on him. Pearl walked over and picked the boy up from the floor. Sitting in Pearl's arms, the boy observed Tanner and suddenly said, Daddy. Tanner's chest heaved up and down heavily when he heard the boy calling him Daddy. A strange feeling rose from the depth of his heart. He was not against this kind of feeling at all. Instead, he felt happy about it. Chapter 1345. Stop it, no, Pearl said after coming back to her senses. She patted her son's buttocks and continued. You should stop calling other people your father. She did not expect that her son would call Tanner Daddy. Even though Tanner was truly his father, she did not want Tanner to know about it. She worried that Tanner might harm her son if he found out he was the kid's father. The boy suddenly cried, Noah wants Daddy. Pearl was stunned. She did not know what she should do when her son began to cry. When she thought about it, she was indeed not considered a competent mother in the past 2 years. Every time her son cried, her mother would help her to calm him down. Just when she did not know what to do, a figure approached her and took the kid away from her arms. A light chuckle wafted into her ears as the man said, Do you know that a man shouldn't cry? Noah stopped crying and looked at him with teary eyes. Daddy. Tanner held him in his arms and stroked his head. Yes, I'm here. When Noah stopped crying, Pearl was so shocked that she froze. In the living room, Noah refused to let Tanner go, and Tanner had been holding him. Antonio and Kamala were sitting in front of him. Both of them had strange expressions on their faces, and the atmosphere was awkward. Kamala rose to her feet and smiled at Noah. Noah, come. Granny will carry you. Noah shook his head, hugged Tanner's neck tightly, and said, I want Daddy. Kamala retracted her arms awkwardly. She did not know what she should feel right now. Noah had never seen his father before ever since he was born, yet he called Tanner Daddy as soon as he saw him. Antonio cleared his throat and said in a serious voice, Tanner, I'm sure you know why Pearl left you that year. It has been so long, and Pearl has already gotten over it. Her mother and I aren't going to poke our noses into the affair between you and Pearl. However, we won't help you either. It's up to Pearl if she wants to forgive you or not. Tanner lowered his head and said, I know. I'm not asking for anything. I just hope I can do everything I can to make it up to her. Make it up to her? Kamala's face turned grim. If you had known this, why would you have done it in the first place? Pear has suffered so much because of you. After that incident, I sent her overseas so that she could forget everything, yet you cast her back in a bad light with just a few words. Kamala became even more agitated as she continued. If you can't accept her, why do you still want to hurt her? If you didn't want to marry her, you could have rejected it when we proposed the marriage. Not only did you cheat on her, but you also treated her with contempt. Antonio went forward and asked her to calm down. Kamala harumphed and turned her head sideways. Tanner was aware of the terrible things he had done to Pearl. He only found out that she was not as expressionless as he thought her to be after reading her diary. She was not heartless. She was not cold. She just did not dare to show her true heart. She might look indifferent on the surface when he hurled those hurtful words and criticisms at her, but in reality, her heart was already riddled with holes. Therefore, he didn't dare to ask her for forgiveness. However, he looked at the boy in his arms and opened his tightly pressed lips. "I'm his father, right?" Antonio and Kamala did not say anything, but the answer was pretty apparent. Half a month later, Lisa was discharged from the hospital, and this was also the first time Daisy went to Lisa's house. Lisa was staying in an old apartment. The apartment had 2 rooms, a living room, and a standalone kitchen. There was a lot of stuff piled here and there in the apartment, making the whole room very packed and small. Chapter 1346. The furniture was all made of ordinary wood, which was much shabbier than the large Goldman mansion. Mrs. Fraser was very enthusiastic. "Daisy, do stay back for dinner today. What do you want to eat? I'll go out and buy some ingredients to cook something you like." Daisy replied with a smile. "Anything will do." "That's good. Then I'll go shopping now." Mrs. Fraser nodded and left immediately, but she did not forget to remind Lisa to entertain her classmate before leaving the house. Lisa brought Daisy to her room. Her room was much smaller than Daisy's, but it still looked warm. The strange thing was that there was a double-decker bed, but the upper deck had obviously been vacant for a long time as it had become a storage space for boxes of all sizes. Daisy sat on a swivel chair next to Lisa's desk and asked, "Lisa, does anyone sleep above you?" Lisa sat on the bed and lowered her eyes. "There used to be someone, but there's no one sleeping up there now." Daisy wondered. "You have an elder brother or younger brother or something, don't you?" Lisa nodded. Daisy asked, "Then why haven't I heard you mention him?" Lisa pouted and opened her mouth slowly. "My brother doesn't like to stay with us." Daisy was momentarily stunned. Lisa seems to have a bad relationship with her brother. Otherwise, it's impossible for her not to mention that she has a brother. But isn't brother a family member? Why doesn't he like to stay with his family? Daisy did not ask any further because she did not want to force Lisa to tell her what she did not want anyone else to know. Mrs. Fraser returned very soon to cook, and because they had guests, she cooked a sumptuous dinner. Mr. Fraser returned from work slightly after that. It was the first time that their daughter had brought a classmate back for dinner, so both Mr. Fraser and Mrs. Fraser were very happy, especially Mrs. Fraser. She did not forget to fetch Daisy more side dishes when they were at the dining table. "Daisy, come, you should eat more." Daisy smiled and thanked her. "Thank you, Auntie." Lisa could see that Daisy was indeed more favored by the elders than she ever was. Even at school, all the teachers liked Daisy very much. In fact, she had always been quite envious of Daisy because the latter was superior at birth and could live a worry-free life without having to work too hard. As for her, "Lisa, you have to eat more too." Daisy picked up a piece of meat and placed it on Lisa's plate. Lisa was dumbfounded and lowered her head. "Thank you." Mrs. Fraser frowned. "Lisa, pay attention while you're eating. What were you thinking just now? You actually made your guest fetch your food." "Auntie, it's fine." Daisy spoke up for Lisa. "Lisa told me that her mother has always been strict with her, and I can feel it. However, her mother has been really tolerant toward me." At that moment, someone knocked on the door. "Who is it?" Mrs. Fraser put down her cutlery, got up, and went to open the door. Meanwhile, Daisy stared in the direction of the door, curiously. When Mrs. Fraser saw the man standing outside the door, her expression turned distressed. "Why are you back at this time?" The boy standing outside was around 17 or 18 years old, his red hair, ear studs, the tattoos on his arms, and attire made him look like a thug. Why can't I come back at this time? The red-haired boy looked into the house, ignored his mother, and walked in with his hands in his pockets. Oh, dinner looks so scrumptious. Is it because my little sister brought her classmate back for dinner? Lisa bit her lower lip and said nothing. The red-haired boy disregarded everyone, sat at the dining table, and grinned. Lisa, why aren't you introducing your classmate to me? Daisy looked at Lisa. Lisa had already put down her cutleries, and her face looked as pale as death. It has nothing to do with you. Chapter 1347. The teenager crossed his legs. You just don't think of me as your brother. Evan, since you're back, eat your dinner. If you don't plan to eat with us, get out. Mr. Fraser's face dimmed. If he knew that he would give birth to such a spoiled and useless son, he would have strangled him to death back then. Evan smiled. Father, no matter what, I'm still your son. Is there a need for you to be so heartless? You're actually shameless enough to admit that you're your father's son? Mrs. Fraser stood behind him. All you do all day is fool around out there without knowing when to come home, and the only time you come back home is when you need money. You're no longer a young lad. Can't you learn how to behave practically, look for a job, and earn some money to pay for your sister's studies? Evan laughed out loud. Why would she need me to pay for her studies? She goes to such a prestigious school, so the classmates she gets to know there should all be filthy rich, right? After saying that, he saw the watch on Lisa's wrist. Wow, this watch is worth thousands of dollars. Nice one, Lisa. You've gotten so rich that you can afford a designer watch while I'm away. Lisa pulled her hand back and covered her wrist subconsciously. Mr. Fraser questioned him furiously. Evan, what do you think you're doing? Evan shrugged. What's wrong with me taking a look at my sister's watch? Since you have the money to buy such an expensive watch for Lisa, then why not spare me some money to spend? After asking his father for some money, he looked at him with a smug smirk. You. Mr. Fraser was so exasperated that his face flushed. He threw the bowl and cutleries, got up, and left. Lisa could not stay put any longer and grabbed Daisy's hand. I'll send you off first. Lisa left with Daisy without waiting for the latter to react to her suggestion. As soon as Daisy stepped out of the house, she heard the quarrel between Mrs. Fraser and Evan. She looked back as many things went through her mind. When they got downstairs, Lisa lowered her head. I'm sorry, Daisy. I didn't know that my brother would return at this time. Daisy looked at her. Your brother, has he always been like that? I'm sorry to have gotten you involved in this farce. Lisa bit her lip. I don't like my brother. Daisy did not ask her about anything in the end. After sending Daisy off, Lisa returned home. As soon as she entered through the door, she witnessed her mother being pushed to the floor. Her expression changed, and she ran over to pull him. Evan, what are you doing? Evan flung her hand away, and Lisa fell to the floor. Mr. Fraser came out of the room when he heard the commotion, saw his wife and daughter on the floor, and lost his head. You bastard! How dare you make a move on your mother and sister? Have you lost your mind? Yes, she's your wife, and she's your daughter, but have you ever treated me like a son? Mr. Fraser was trembling with anger. Nobody raised you to be this useless. We sent you to a school, and all you did was mix with the wrong crowd. If you were half as obedient as your sister, you wouldn't have been sent to a juvenile detention center. Evan swept all the tableware on the table to the floor. The commotion was so loud that Lisa did not dare to make a sound. Evan went back to the room, and Lisa suddenly remembered something, got up, and chased after him. Evan saw the designer bag in the room and the precious bracelets in the jewelry box, and she immediately grabbed them. This was not the first time he had done that. In the past, as long as Lisa had any possessions worth some money, even the pocket money she had saved, her brother would take them all away. Evan, these things aren't mine. Lisa dashed up to him and wanted to stop him. Unfortunately, Evan pushed her away. I dare you to stop me. I know that you must have become friends with some filthy rich classmates, and these are all gifts that you got from them. Your classmates are truly generous. He looked at the brand new bag in his hand. I'll get at least several $1,000s if I can sell this as a pre-owned bag. Anyway, you can always get your classmates to give you more, can't you? Chapter 1348. Lisa froze in place, and she could only watch helplessly at the side as Evan took away everything Daisy had given her. Back at the Goldman mansion, Daisy had just come upstairs when she saw Colton leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, waiting for her. She frowned. Colton, you're acting cool again. Who's acting cool? Colton inserted his hands back into his pockets. Didn't you go to Lisa's house for dinner? Why are you back so soon? The dinner is over already. Daisy walked to the door, thought of something, and stopped. Colton, I think you're quite a fine brother. The corners of Colton's mouth twitched. Have you fallen ill? It's rare to get complimented by Daisy. You can let your imagination run wild. Daisy spread her hands, pushed the door, and got into the room. Colton watched as the door closed, rubbing his chin as if he was deeply absorbed in his thoughts. The next day, after Maisie sent Daisy and Colton to school, he went to Nolan's company to deliver him a lunchbox she had prepared. Quincy came out of the office and saw Maisie. Mrs. Goldman, why are you here? Maisie lifted the lunchbox in her hand, and he recognized it at first glance. Oh, it turns out to be a loving breakfast for Mr. Goldman. Maisie laughed out loud. If you're envious, find yourself a wife sooner. Quincy was at a loss for words. This couple, enough is enough. Chapter 1349. Maisie pushed open the door and walked into the office. Nolan was behind the desk, supporting his forehead with one hand while reading the documents in front of him. He had heard Maisie's conversation with Quincy outside, lifted his gaze, and chuckled. Are you trying to become a matchmaker now? You can always arrange a blind date for Quincy. Maisie put the lunchbox on the desk. He's your employee. As his boss, why aren't you the one arranging it for him? Nolan smirked as he put down the documents. It's not that you don't know me, I don't know many women. Maisie choked on her own words. Sure enough, since I got to know him up until now, I've never seen any of Nolan's female friends. All the people around him are basically men. Maisie propped her arms against the surface of the desk and leaned forward. Nolan, you should have been very popular back in college. Did none of the ladies in college tackle you back then? Nolan caressed her cheek with his palm. Yes, I didn't really encounter any of them. Nolan had been so focused on studying and managing the company back in college that he had no time or energy to focus on other things. Maisie held the back of his hand and laughed. You didn't even save the contact information of any ladies from back then? He frowned, pinched the back of her neck, and pulled her closer. Why ask? Do you want me to contact my female classmates after all these years? No, I'm just curious. She smiled as her eyes narrowed, then got up and opened the lunchbox. I made egg fried rice for you. I haven't tried it myself, so I wonder how it tastes. Nolan picked up the spoon, took a mouthful, and nodded. This isn't bad. Really? Maisie stared at him for fear of missing the slightest change in his expression. He lifted his eyelids and gazed at her. Your cooking skills have improved a little over the years. At that moment, there was a knock on the office door. Maisie took the initiative to retreat to the couch and sat down. Seeing that she sat down obediently, Nolan chuckled but calmed down almost instantly and went back to normal. Come in. Chapter 1350. Quincy pushed the door open and quickly walked up to the desk. Mr. Goldman, Mr. Xavier of Beyond Tech Corporation wants to see you. Nolan frowned. Beyond Tech Corporation hasn't been in any collaboration with us before this. What do they wish to bring to my attention? Quincy shook his head. I'm not sure. The front desk said they had already been waiting for an hour. It said that Beyond Tech Corporation is about to be acquired by another company, and its prospects are looking rather grim, so maybe he's here to seek some sort of collaboration? Nolan put the documents on the desk and leaned back against the back of the chair. A tech company that's about to be acquired comes to me for a collaboration. What do they think Black Gold is? A charity? Tell the front desk to ask them to leave. Quincy called the front desk and told them exactly what Nolan said. The receptionist then said something to him, and he looked at Nolan immediately. Mr. Goldman, was Mr. Xavier's daughter your coursemate back in college? A chuckle came out of nowhere. Maisie covered her mouth and turned her face away, but her trembling shoulders had already betrayed her. Nolan pinched the bridge of his nose. Z, is it funny? I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. Maisie still could not help but want to laugh. Nolan glared at Quincy. You, go out. Quincy was stunned for a split second and then left the office tactfully. Nolan walked toward Maisie, and before she could react, a figure had leaned forward and kissed her lips. Maisie could no longer laugh, all she could feel was a dense and domineering aura that came with him. She propped her hands against his shoulders, and just as she was able to catch a breath, he clasped the back of her neck with his hand and kissed her more vigorously. After a long time, she panted. I have to head back home already. He rubbed her cherry lips with his fingertips. Aren't you going to stay? You have work to do. Aren't you afraid that you'll be badmouthed if I stay? Maisie pushed him away gently. If I stay for another minute, I don't know if I'll still be able to hold myself back. Nolan chuckled inwardly and moved his lips closer to her cheek. You're the wife of the company's owner. Who in the world would have the balls to gossip about you? Maisie got nibbled by him on the side of her neck. Nolan Goldman, you. Quincy's voice came from the other side of the door when the emotions were about to overflow. Mr. Goldman, are you ready? Nolan was rendered speechless. Maisie chuckled and lifted Nolan's upset face. You should work first. So, it's not very appropriate for me to stay here, is it? Nolan took a deep breath and pinched the tip of her nose. I'll let you go this time around. He then asked Quincy to lead the other party to his office. When Edward of Beyond Tech Corporation learned that Nolan was not willing to see him, he immediately brought his daughter. He followed Quincy to the administrative office, walked into the office with a smile, and saw Maisie sitting on the couch with a cup of tea. He was momentarily stunned. Mr. Goldman, are you seeing a guest? Nolan's expression slightly dimmed. She's my wife. Maisie gave off a polite smile. Edward realized that he had said something wrong and quickly explained, I'm really sorry, my eyesight has been deteriorating exponentially recently, and I'm now as blind as a bat. I failed to recognize Mrs. Goldman. She's really young and beautiful. Maisie was quite happy when he praised her for looking young and beautiful. However, Nolan did not like it deep down. Does that mean that he thinks I've robbed the cradle? Edward did not notice the change in Nolan's facial expression and introduced his daughter with a grin. Mr. Goldman, I heard from my daughter, Elaine, that she shared the same course with you back in college. I wonder if you still remember that? Elaine nodded with a smile. Maisie took a closer look at the lady. She exuded a very gentle and magnanimous temperament and looked gorgeous. Nolan frowned. I'm sorry. It's been so long since I graduated, so I can't really remember any of my coursemates. Edward was slightly embarrassed and gave off an awkward chuckle. It doesn't matter. I studied computing science too. You sat in the row right behind mine back then. Elaine tried to remind Nolan. However, Nolan's expression remained unchanged, and his attitude was extremely indifferent. I don't remember that.